Hi, I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief of Pharma Forum. I'm here at ASCO 2023 in Chicago, and I'm joined by Dr. Leilon Wilfong, who is Senior Vice President with the U.S. Oncology Network. And I apologize, you're going to have to tell me exactly what you're Senior Vice President of.
Senior Vice President of Payer and Care Transformation.
Right. And you're here to talk a little bit about payment models and value-based care at this conference, right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about that. Obviously, it's like this is a medical conference. A lot of stuff here is geared around the R&D, the science.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you here to kind of talk about the business side and what are you going to be talking about?
So, oncology care is becoming extremely expensive. The new therapies that have totally transformed the way that we deliver care and the outcomes for patients who are living much longer with cancer than they ever have before with much less toxicity comes at a price. And we have to think about how we pay for all of this stuff and in order to be able to deliver that high quality cancer care. So that's why we're here and why it's important for ASCO to start really digging into payment reform, because we can't continue an unsustainable path forward in the United States of ever rising cost of cancer care. We have to start thinking about how we actually deliver care in a cost affordable fashion.
Is there something about the new drugs that are coming out that makes them more expensive than the drugs we had before, or is it just that the prices are going up for sort of market forces reasons?
It's a little bit of both, but there is a reason why the drugs are becoming more expensive. As we get into more molecularly targeted therapies, our patient populations become much smaller. So simple economics, it's price times volume that equals profitability for a pharma company. So if you're using drugs in a much smaller population, they have to be able to charge a higher price in order to regain their investments in developing and delivering those drugs to the patients that need them. So as we get into smaller patient volumes, the prices normally will go up. That's simple economics. That's part of that. And I think just the ongoing cost of study and regulations and things cause the prices to be high as well. In addition to simple, you charge what you can for the drugs.
So we're not going to move away from more and more targeted therapies, obviously, because that's sort of what we're discovering works in oncology. So how do we solve the problem?
It's a really good question, a very complex question. I think there's a multifaceted approach that we need to think through. One is, how do we ease some of the regulatory burden on pharma as they develop the drugs? And I know the FDA is looking at how do we actually make things better and more cost efficient for actually drug development, and removing some of the rules and regulations that have been in place for 30, 40 years that don't necessarily apply today for how we need to develop drugs. So I think that's a big one. The other one is thinking about the profits that flow through healthcare and where those profits should lie. I mean, there's numerous entities that get paid for delivering healthcare. You have the drug manufacturers, you have the physicians and the practices, you have the payers, you have the PBMs. A lot of them are taking money out of the system. And how do you figure out where that money should actually be spent is a big focus of what's happening now in Congress and in payment reform. And then finally, reducing waste. I mean, that's probably the most important thing that we need to do is reduce waste in the system. Waste can be just making sure that we're giving the right drugs to the right patients and not wasting drugs on patients that won't benefit from them, which is one of the benefits of molecularly targeted therapy, is that if we can start narrowing our patient populations down to the ones that truly benefit from these high-cost therapies, making sure that we're managing patients appropriately to keep them out of hospitals and emergency rooms, and reducing wasteful care. And then, ordering the right test at the right time for patients is also critical to doing that.
But of course, that decreases the cost to the whole system,
Correct.
But it doesn't necessarily make things cheaper for each patient, right?
Correct. Making sure the patient gets the right therapy is going to improve the economic outcome of that patient. Meaning, when you look at economic outcomes for patients, you're really looking at how much cost you're spending for what benefit you're getting. So if we're giving patients even high cost therapies, but they're having significant benefit from them, the cost is the same, but the overall value to that patient is greater.
as opposed to sort of trying one therapy that doesn't work and having
Correct.
all that sunk cost.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what about kind of like value-based care? I mean, is that part of the solution here?
I believe it is. Obviously, that's what I do for a living, so I do believe in it. But if you think about the way that physicians get paid today, we get paid on a fee-for-service model. So the more we do, the more we make. The more drugs we give, the more imaging we order, the more radiation, the more patients we see, the more we make. That's a standard fee-for-service model. And value-based care and payment reform really looks at, can we change that? Can we actually pay physicians differently in providing high-quality cancer care versus volume? Can we pay them on outcomes and keeping, doing the navigation of their services that we need to do to keep them out of the hospital? Can we reward them for making sure they're doing the appropriate testing and giving the drugs to the right patients? And that's what value-based care is all about, is making sure that we align the incentives to the quality of care that's being delivered rather than just simply volume.
When it comes to physicians, I think that I understand the premise pretty well, right? That we incentivize them to keep people out of the hospital instead of to keep people in the hospital. You can make that work. What about pharma, though? I mean, pharma gets paid for the drugs. It's a pretty straightforward
Right.
sort of business model. Is there any way that kind of paying for value can improve that situation too?
I believe it can. I think especially with targeted therapy, we want to make sure that we're giving the drugs to the right patient populations. And if we're doing so and they're actually extending patients' lives, the amount of time on drug will be longer for those patients.
And so that leads to increased profits.
Profitability, because they're selling more drug, because patients are able to stay on drugs for a longer period of time because you're giving it to them correctly and you're keeping them well while you're doing it. So I think there's some benefit to pharma, and I think at the end of the day, pharma is going to be forced to think through this, right? I mean, gone are the days where people are willing to pay whatever amount for cancer care, and so there's a huge movement now to make sure that we're getting value for the payment that's being given.
It's a very controversial topic right now, the idea of payment reform. There's this argument that's sprung up around the Inflation Reduction Act that, will cheaper drugs mean that innovation doesn't happen at the same rate? Do we need these huge profit margins in order to justify the investments that's happening in R&D? Where do you fall down on that? I mean, you know what the company line is from pharma. I don't have to say it for you. What do you say in response to that?
No, I agree. Pharma needs to have incentives to continue to develop drugs. I mean, we would not be where we are today with the improvements in cancer care if we didn't have the drugs that we have. This whole meeting is about drug development and what novel therapies are accomplishing for patient outcomes. So we need that R&D. So I think, we definitely, whatever happens, we need to make sure that pharma continues to get those investments. I do think, especially from a drug cost standpoint, there's significant waste in the system that we should extract from the system to lower drug costs, is my personal opinion. So we don't want to take the money out of R&D. We want to take it out of the different entities that are profiting off drug sales outside of the research and development that's being done.
Right. Find out where all the money is leaking out throughout the system. And that seems to be something that both sides can agree on. Although I imagine that pinning down exactly where you're going to plug those leaks, you'll start to lose agreement because someone is going to get less money.
Someone will definitely get less money. And of course, as a practicing physician, I want to make sure that our physicians are compensated for, and the practices are compensated for providing high quality cancer care. So I don't want to take the money out of them, or I want to make sure that we're getting money appropriately to provide our outcomes that we need to provide. But you're right. I mean, no matter where the levers come from, somebody's not going to be happy because you are going to reduce the profitability for someone to be delivering cancer care.
Right. But I mean, it's always been a game of balancing the interests of stakeholders. And I think for a long time, the stakeholder that didn't have a voice at the table was the patient.
Correct.
Right? And now it feels like there is a real momentum because of, groups like yours, because of your pressure on the government to really say, hey, the patient is a stakeholder too. And, they're the one who's really imperiled by this.
I completely agree. I mean, at the end of the day, the patient is the one that has cancer. The patient's the one taking the drug, and the patient's the one that has the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So we need to make sure that whatever we do, we focus on the patient and what's right for them. And as an extension of that, I think what we're seeing with payment reform is employers who are paying for employed patients' care are asking that same question. Are my employees getting the high quality care that they need at an affordable cost? Government's asking that question for government funded programs. So I think those questions are being asked to think about how do we focus back on the patient and making sure we're doing what's right for the patient, and putting that above any other profitability.
Well, this is a super interesting topic, and I'm glad I got an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about it. Any other final thoughts? Anything you're particularly interested in around this debate or this conversation?
I think we're at an inflection point in cancer care. We have, over the past few years, had significant improvements and advances in science. We continue to see that with the bispecific antibodies and the ongoing advancements in immunotherapy. But we're also at an inflection point in payment. We've reached a critical limit in the United States where we just can't afford to continue doing things as we've done. So we need to start thinking about that as well. And how do we appropriately pay for the therapies that we're giving?
Well, I'll throw one more thing in here because I one context that I hear about this a lot lately is the idea of these disease-modifying cell and gene therapies that might affect cures in a completely different way, where you only have to do it once or one and done or close to, and suddenly the typical kind of pharma model of like, we make more money if we keep them alive longer so they can be on the drug longer, it just falls apart. You've got to charge a ridiculous amount for the one time. How do you think it's emerging that we're going to deal with that, and is value-based care a piece of that also?
So that's a very good question. It is. I don't know if anyone has the right answer for that yet. From an insurance standpoint, one of the reasons why insurance pays for healthcare is to prevent higher costs down the line. That's why your yearly screening, wellness visit with your physician, screening colonoscopies are covered benefits now, is because spending that money now saves them money long term. The high cost therapies like you're talking about, these cellular and gene therapies, they have potential to markedly impact patients' lives and outcomes. Take sickle cell, for example, which for many patients can turn into a chronic, debilitating, costly disease long term. Hemophilia is another great example of that, where you can truly change people's lives. And so there will be cost savings to the system long term, but who's going to pay for that one-time event? Because the insurance company may not get the long-term benefit of that paying for that one-time event. So it's something we're going to have to figure out in the US. I think other countries where they have socialized healthcare, it's a little easier for them because they are on the hook for that patient's long-term outcomes, different in the United States. We're going to have to really think through how do we do that in the United States so that we can spend more money now, but we're going to save money and markedly improve patients' lives for the long term.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wilfong. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Same.